All right, welcome back to the Zoom Beit Midrash here. We're in Masechet Makkot. I'm going to start us off with just a little bit of a morsel of Talmud on 3b. If you're using an art scroll, it's 3b3, and I'm going to share the screen over here. This happens to be a ruling of Rav Yehuda that he states in the name of his teacher, in Rav's name. And it turns out that this teaching really has nothing to do with the tractate itself. And sometimes you get that in the Gemara. Remember, you have these little chapbooks of teachings from rabbis when they get a chance to include teachings that are of the sages. But I can't skip this little teaching because I love to find when the Talmud takes a little bit of a break and moves into the realm of Sabbath Law, especially as it relates to packaging engineering. If you recall, Alav Shalom, my father, was a packaging engineer. And at Pesach, I tried to give a talk about the intersection between packaging engineering, a little chemical engineering, and rabbinic literature. And as a matter of fact, I don't have to wait till Pesach this year, because here we're going to just encounter one of those spots where you get ancient packaging engineering information. And if you look really through those lenses, and there were only 3 universities that had packaging engineering courses of study at my father's time. He worked for Warner Lambert and then for Kraft Foods. And he worked in the beverage division. And here's a little bit about the ancient packaging of beverages and the material reality of that world. And of course, Sabbath law is concerned with whether or not we've broken the Sabbath law, and someone would be responsible for bringing an offering, a sin offering, if they indeed transgressed the laws of the Sabbath. And so here it is. On 3b3 in the art scroll, on the right-hand column, here on the screen, Rav Yehuda says that Rav says, Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, Hapoteach beit hatzavar b'Shabbat chayav chatat. If you unwittingly open a new neck opening in a shirt on Shabbat by cutting through the fabric and the threads that kept it closed, then you're liable for a chatat offering. You're liable for a chatat. Matkifla Rav Kahana. Rav Kahana objects to this, and he says, "V'chi ma bein zeh lemigufat chavit." What's the difference between this and the stopper of a wine barrel? Amar le zeh chibur v'zeh eino chibur. They say, Rabbi says to him, it's not comparable. The cases are different. In this case, that of the one where you open the neck of the shirt, the material closing the neck hole is considered a connecting element. It's, in this case, a part of the weave of the fabric. And in the case of the stopper of the barrel, the stopper is not considered a connecting element, as its purpose is what? To be removed entirely from the barrel. Now, by the way, if there's a shirt that has some kind of connective threading and it has a neck opening ultimately, and you have to open it up and wear it on a Shabbos, that's supposed to be there? Any of the gentlemen out there ever want to put on a suit jacket and wear a little pocket hanky, and this pocket on the suit jacket is closed with a couple of threads? Is that inherently part of the suit jacket, or is that annoying because there's 18 little stitches and you can't pull it really easily without ripping your entire pocket off? And it would be terrible if you tried. And don't try it, because, and this is not permission to try it by any means from the Jewish tradition, those little things, they're meant to be cut. It's not an inherent weave. But someone might come and argue inherent weave part of the fabric. The pocket is meant to stay close to your chest. It never was meant to have those silly little handkerchiefs in the pocket of the suit. And so you can't really open that up and put the little pocket kerchief in the jacket. So that's like the first discussion. Is it really part of the stitching or is it not? By the way, back slits. You ever have a jacket and you forget? Or you see a couple teenagers who never knew that that's what happens with a jacket. It first comes stitched at the back and they're all, at the bar mitzvah, and half of them have those little X's because the little, the slits in the jackets aren't open yet. Trust me, rabbis fulfill many functions, including fashion consultants with threads that have to be cut for young men. And so it's the Gemara is arguing, are those inherently part of it because the garment came that way and the garment was protected that way? And on Shabbos, if it's an inherent part of the weave, you shouldn't be able to take apart the stitches. But on the other hand, I might want to take apart the stitches because it's not really, full fashion here. I got to have my pocket handkerchief. I got to have my slits. Okay. But that's not the issue that then is brought as the one that proves about, things that can come apart. The stopper in a wine barrel is meant to be taken out, says the Gemara. And if it's meant to be really taken out and we understand that very clearly, then I'm not worried about any kind of Shabbos breach. So look at the background. I love this little diagram in the Steinsaltz. Talk about packaging engineering. So too was Rabbi Steinsaltz interested in packaging engineering. Stopper of a barrel, migufat chavi. An earthenware stopper was used to seal the narrow mouth of a wine barrel. The stopper was in essence an independent vessel, but when wine was transported or placed in storage for an extended period of time, the stoppers were often cemented in place to ensure the barrel remained sealed. When the time arrived to open the barrel, one would break the mortar and extract the cover. So you see there's the stopper. And then around this part, you would get some cementing going on. And so even if it's cemented is the force of the Gemara, even if there's certain kind of sealant around the outside, you could break that because it was meant to be broken. This gets right up into modern halacha if you're very interested in playing by the rules of the game. So someone comes over and they're very gracious and they come to Shabbos and they bring a bottle of wine. So you know how it has the foil on the outside? So are you allowed to rip the foil off? In a very, very engaged religious household, they might not open that bottle of wine you brought because it really has foil that needs to be ripped. And that's to keep it fresh. But don't we say that that's like the stopper and the cement, that you both take the cement off and the stopper? So I hold that, of course, it's exactly like this Gemara. You were to bring a bottle of wine, and of course, it was good, and we wanted to open it. And you take the foil and the stopper out based on this Gemara. Now, what's really smart is that some kosher wineries have started to make, that foil part on a bottle of wine. If you hold it and you twist the bottle, you don't need to rip the foil. It actually spins off. It's a feature of kosher wine so that you don't have this machloket talmudically. Can you believe it? They tell me that it's actually happened with other wine companies as well because people were cutting their hands on the foils because foil gets sharp. You know how when you use those, silver trays and you have a little pressing down the all over New York, these guys use it. It's part of the union dues, I think, to really train your hands with enough calluses to be able to press down these trays. Bless them. They don't get any kind of cuts with these crazy silver edges, these edges of trays. anyway, the whole idea is that this ancient world of keeping wine in some ways parallels our modern world, but in other ways not. What does it mean that they cemented? Did they really use like a regular mortar? Well, there's two different pastes that they could use for such a purpose. Sometimes those pastes, if they weren't mixed well enough with a little bit of chalky powder from some type of stone, they might have attracted ants and bugs. Why? Because the pastes were made from either figs or dates. And they would make a organic, biodegradable kind of mortar that they would put around the lip of the opening and then put the stopper in and kind of cement it in place. And if it was too fruity and too sugary, that was a problem, of course. There were special mortars that were used that were more clay-based and earthen. And in Masechet Kelim, which is a tractate of vessels, you have big discussions there as to what the kosher kind of sealants would be. All of this in the realm of ancient packaging engineering that the rabbis were involved with in order to really understand how to keep things fresh and worry about spoilage and whether or not you're allowed to open it or close it on Shabbos. So just gives me a chance to share a wonderful passion for the ancient world of packaging engineering. All right, that's literally one little teeny paragraph. That was a side issue because they mentioned the sabbatical year and they mentioned all kinds of things about debts and they mentioned Rav Yehuda in the name of Rav and Rav Kahana and discussions, and that law came up. So that's the law we want to start with tonight. We're now going to jump our way forward to a very important Mishnah in Makkot on 5a. If you're using an art scroll, it's 5a1. And it's on Daf Hey. That's page 5. And there are those who would say that this probably should have been the first Mishnah in our tractate. Remember, like when we started, the first Mishnah sounded like the question was, how do we actually achieve making a definitive ruling that the first two witnesses that testify in a court of law are Eidim Zomamim, right? That's what the first question of the first Mishnah really was. But then what do we see the Mishnah do on page 2? When we first got there, it was about exceptional cases, where with the Eidim Zomamim, we had a case where it really didn't change the status of the conspiring witnesses because of some reality that we pointed out. It was some exception to the rule. We defined Eidim Zomamim only because we needed to know what conspiring witnesses really were. And when we defined conspiring witnesses, we of course remembered that it was a Torah law that two witnesses who come regarding two witnesses who conspired with each other could be found to be conspiring witnesses because of what is called hazama, because they have the ability to say that these two witnesses could not be telling the truth. They are not telling the truth based on the fact that they were with us in such and such a place. Now, we looked at that and how they testified, but now we're going to get with this Mishnah on page 5, which seems to be like a better first Mishnah But the Gemara already told us that since it was continuing along the discussion from Sanhedrin, that's why the other Mishnah came first. But now on page 5, we're really going to get to the heart of the matter about this conspiracy of these two witnesses to impugn the character and to falsely accuse and really do injustice both to a potential defendant and the system of law itself, right? Because these Eidim Zomim prove that these two tricked the entire system. These two really say that not only are you going to cause some type of erroneous sentence and frame this guy who's on trial, but you are bastardizing the entire legal system. So comes along page 5 and the Mishnah on page 5, and we're going to get now what sounds like the right opening for the tractate, but it's on 5a. Matnitin. Here's the Mishnah on 5a. Mishalshin. No, that's not the Mishnah I want. Here it is. Matnitin. There's a short Mishnah right before this one. So I'm skipping to the Mishnah I want. And it's actually, in terms of the art scroll, on 5A1 at the bottom. So if you're using the art scroll, it's the second Mishnah on the page, down below. Matnitin. Ein ha'edim na'asim zomamin ad sheyazimu et atzman. So it says that witnesses don't become zomamin. We can't call them conspiring witnesses until other witnesses, these are the yazimu, this implies that two other witnesses impeach et atzman, impeach the actual witnesses themselves. And you see here in the Steinsaltz it says, and not merely their testimony. So it sounds like what is suggested simply by reading this Mishnah in the Ivrit, in the Hebrew, and in the English, is that in order to really do hazama, I can't just come as a second pair of witnesses and say, you're wrong, Reuben did not kill Shimon. I somehow have to say about the two witnesses who are conspiring against Reuben that they themselves in no way, shape, or form could have seen the murder. I have to really base it on impeaching the witnesses themselves and not just their testimony. Okay, but now the Mishnah, not the Gemara, still the Mishnah wants to know, Ketzad, how so? Amru. So this is regarding a case. We're now going to see in a case, an application. Me'idin ani be'ish ploni sheharaged an nefesh. With regard to a man called so-and-so, in other words, called Reuben, that he killed Shimon, that he killed a person, and they said about that murder that it happened in a certain place at a certain time. Remember, because they have to really be able to say precisely what happens in order to really try to convict so-and-so, Reuben, of the murder. Amru lahem, a second set of witnesses comes to the court and says to them, Heyachatem me'idin. How in the world can you testify that that is the case Sheharei neherag zeh, o hahoreg zeh, that this person who was killed or this person is the killer. Haya imanu oto hayom b'makom ploni. When you were with us in such and such a place, you were with us in Hatzaplatz, while you were saying you were in Yenemsveld and saw the murder. There's no way you could have been in Yenemsveld if you were in Hatzaplatz. Ein elu zomamin. In that case, although it says here the second set of witnesses contradicted the testimony of the first set, these first witnesses are not rendered conspiring witnesses. Why are they not in that place? Aval amru lahem heyachatem eidim sheharei atem hayitem imanu oto hayom b'makom ploni. If they say specifically, how can you testify about that event? You were with us on that day in such and such a place. In this case, they are considered conspiring witnesses, v'neheragin al pihem, and they are executed on the basis of that second set's testimony. What's the difference? The first testimony was regarding a person who was killed, or this person who killed, that he was with us with the second set of witnesses. Oh, so we have to read very carefully the distinction in the Mishnah. It wasn't that they were saying about the person testifying that he or she was in the alternative place. It was the distinction that the person who was killed or this person who killed was with us. If that's the testimony of the two witnesses who come to impeach the first two witnesses, then that does not make the first two witnesses Eidim Zomamim. We can't say that they're conspiring. But if the second set of witnesses come and say, no, you were with us, not he was with us who was killed, or he who killed was with us. Rather, if you were with us, meaning the actual Eidim, you guys were with us on such and such a day in such and such a place. How could you possibly have seen a murder? Then that makes the first set of witnesses the Eidim Zomamim. Okay, so to be clear, the Mishnah sets out a distinction in what is exactly said. Is it about the person who killed? Is it about the person who was killed? That it couldn't be that that was the case because, oh, Reuben was with us, or Shimon was with us. Not you were in Yedemsveld, meaning you, the witnesses, while you said you were in Hatzaplatz. The first case is really about Reuben or Shimon. The Mishnah goes and says, if it's about Reuben or Shimon, I am now not able to say the Hazama takes hold. If the second set of witnesses comes and says about the witnesses themselves, that you guys were in such and such a city and not in that place where the murder took place, then I could make them Zomamim, I could call them conspiring witnesses, and the penalty that they sought to have inflicted on the defendant, now we inflict that penalty on them, all the way to capital punishment. Yes, Richard.
It seems to me that makes sense in this following context, that if they simply said that the murdered person, who apparently they can't find the body or something, that the murdered person was murdered in this particular place, or they said that I saw so-and-so kill the other guy in this place, that could be simply a case of mistaken identity. So their testimony was wrong. It was wrong. Oh no, you must be confusing them for somebody else. That could be an innocent misidentification. But if they weren't in that place because they were with you, there's only one explanation for that, is they're making it up because they weren't even in the place that they said they observed it. So that I think is the difference.
Yeah, I think is one different, and by the way, some commentary agrees with you and says it's because it might be a case of mistaken identity. On the other hand, the textual kind of threshold that is held up and which the Mishnah is expressing is that Heizimu Otam, you'll see in the Gemara, it's going to discuss this. It's not a matter of testifying as to your understanding of who really committed the murder, or if the guy was even in the place where the murder happened, and you're disputing the facts in the courtroom. What you do to effectuate hazama, what you do to effectuate the whole chiddush, remember this is a new area of law that we have established with Torah behind us, Deuteronomy, and the trust that the second set of witnesses are going to tell the truth because of the gravity of testifying in a court of law in God's name and before the court and all that serious stuff. It's really about impeaching them, atzman. And so I don't even have to use as the reason, though I hear you, Richard, and you're right, in a certain case, like we could figure out, that seems like could be mistaken identity, right? And therefore my testimony is as shaky as anybody else's with regard to who killed who. And therefore there's all kinds of, fuzziness within eyewitness testimonies. But really the Torah is holding out very textually, very straightforwardly, until I impeach them because they were in a different place, I have nothing. I have nothing, and I don't even need to worry about why. I don't need to worry about whether or not, because it's maybe a case of mistaken identity. Though our inclination sometimes is to figure out exactly the whys behind the Gemara's rulings, which the Gemara does itself. So I just want to point that out, that that's part of the debates here about, the whys and wherefores. Okay, good. So to continue with the last part of the Mishnah, you see it says, Ba'u acherim. Now, what if other witnesses, a third set comes? Oh, I think somebody over the weeks here has asked a form of this question. I can't remember, who it was, but, here we go. So does it lead to a third set of two witnesses? And by the way, will it lead to even more? Are we saying this goes, ad infinitum? So look at this situation. Ba'u acherim v'hezimu. A third set of two witnesses comes and corroborates what? The testimony of the first set of witnesses. Ba'u acherim v'hezimum. So what do? The second set of witnesses testify that this third set of witnesses were also with them elsewhere. Afilu mea, even 100 pairs of witnesses come, right? If other witnesses come, a fourth set, came and corroborated the testimony of the first set, but the second set says they were with us, then they're rendered conspiring witnesses, even if 100 sets were to have come, kulam yehargu, we say that all of them should get the death penalty. Listen to it again. Ba'u acherim, other witnesses come after the first set is already discredited. And the new set says, no. The crime is as the first set said it. Reuben killed Shimon at such and such a time in such and such a place. And they who discredited the first set discredit them as well, this new set, which was the third set, through the process of hazama, meaning they come, the two witnesses, they take their oath before the judges, they say that these two people are with us, they've impeached the witnesses, not just the testimony. We say they are somewhere else at the time of the crime. They are considered conspiring witnesses. Ba'u acherim, and still others come with the same testimony as the first and the third set of witnesses. Other witnesses come. Hazimum, and they are discredited through the two witnesses saying, no, they were with us. Afilu meya, even 100 pairs of witnesses. There were now 200 witnesses saying that Reuben killed Shimon in such and such a place at such and such a time. If the two witnesses who were Hazimu say that all these people were with us, kulam yehargu, we say that every one of those witnesses is a conspiring witness, and they are given the sentence that they sought to falsely thrust at the defendant. They are hanged, or they are stoned, or they are done by the sword, even 100 pairs. Now, we'll read what Rabbi Yehuda says, and then we'll talk about it. Rabbi Yehuda says, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, istatit hizo. Rabbi Yehuda says, wait a minute. This is a situation where a set of witnesses, one set of witnesses, renders all the other ones conspiring witnesses. It's a conspiracy. Istati. Now we suspect these two conspiring witnesses that they tried to what? Just say about all those witnesses who testified as to the nature of the crime, that Reuben killed Shimon in such and such a place at such and such a time, that they were the ones to commit the conspiracy. Because they were ready to impeach all witnesses who came and said, no, the murder happened. Reuben killed Shimon in such and such a place at such and such a time. So in that case, since there's a little bit of chashash, there's a little bit of suspicion that the pair who testified and creates the Eidim Zomamim, who affirms that the first set of witnesses and the third and the fourth and the fifth, all the way to 100, since we have a little suspicion that they're ready to just impeach everybody and say they were with us, so what do? The first set alone is executed. Only the first set. That'll take care of it. Now I ask you, is that where you thought it was going to end? If I have a little bit of doubt in my mind, if I doubt that the process really worked here, I've got two witnesses who come, second set, impeaches the first set, and then 99 other pair of witnesses come, testify as to Reuben killing Shimon. And Rabbi Yehuda, in his wisdom, says, obviously these two were ready to impeach anybody who came forth with testifying against, Reuben. Who is he? Is he a brother to one of these guys? I don't know. No, he wouldn't have a witness who's a brother, by the way. So don't let me mess that up. Why are these two willing to impeach every witness who comes to testify? So if Rabbi Yehuda says that we can get to a place where the process of hazama, and this sounds like a healthy check and balance on a system of justice, right? Even if we kind of trust two new witnesses to testify against two witnesses in the court of law and say they were with us, and therefore we call them Eidim Zomamim, even if we have that as a chiddush of the Torah, and we know how serious that is, and we know that we're going to trust this, but 100 come, that we only kill the first set to satisfy. Are we doing this to satisfy the notion that the Torah says that there's a process of hazama and that we actually have to abide by that conspiracy theory that they brought up vis-a-vis the first set, and they get the death sentence that they sought to impose on Reuben, and now, even though there's a little doubt with the 99 other pair, they go free, and we're kind of, we're good because the system still has to work, as opposed to Rabbi Yehuda saying this whole system is suspect. It can lead to a conspiracy on the other side. And when it turns into some kind of circus in the courtroom, that these two are willing to say, all these people were with us, it's not possible. So we should let the whole thing go because it casts doubt on the whole process. Rabbi Yehuda's winding up with sentencing the first pair as Eidim Zomamim. They're just baffling, right? It's just baffling. I mean, maybe someone has a theory as to why Rabbi Yehuda winds up there, other than mine. That is to say, we've got to fulfill the words of the Torah anyway, because these two came, and now we've gotten ourselves into accepting them as witnesses that are impeaching at least the first set, and otherwise I'm not gonna do it to the next 99. But for this first set, we have to make an example, or else the whole system's going to fail. And maybe it's a systems failure kind of nod to the system, that if I don't allow this to happen, if I don't execute them, then no one's going to come and put themselves out there. I don't think that's a great argument. I'm just trying to come up with a way to understand, not reading Gemara yet, what really, and if the Gemara even explains it at all, why this is where we land. Because Rabbi Yehuda could have very well said, if they're going to say it about a second set of witnesses, maybe, but 100? If already 100 pairs, then I have to throw the whole case out of court. And nobody's an Eidim Zomamim, and nobody's, if you will, no one's prosecuted as being a false witness either. Because remember, there's another mitzvah involved here. You can't be a false witness. And midavar sheker tirchak. And you can't lie. You should distance yourself from lies. So that's where we are by the end of the Mishnah. What do you make of this last part of the Mishnah and our situation to here?
I think it could have a chilling effect on true witnesses, because if you're a true witness and all of a sudden two guys who've got it in for you show up and say that you were with them, you could be in great mortal danger. So I think it would really stifle people coming forward to be witnesses at all.
Right, and isn't it the case with any good system of law that invites witnesses and requires of witnesses to be very detail-oriented and to testify in courts of law publicly, and where people have the right to face their accusers, right? Don't we want to have as pure a system as possible in order to encourage people to participate? I mean, it's hard enough that people worry that they're going to be now targeted afterwards, right? So, yeah, to put such a challenge to the system seems illogical.
I'll just say, I served on a grand jury a year and a half ago,
mm-hmm.
and it was clear that some people were really uncomfortable being witnesses. Even in a closed grand jury situation. So I think you really have to think hard about what you do that will encourage witnesses to come forward, because if they don't, you're probably going to make a lot of mistakes.
Yeah, this gets us really stirring about that matter, about how serious it is. I think many people are truly worried about becoming witnesses in the court system. You know, it impacts their life very locally, hyper locally, more than we know sometimes, especially in criminal matters and criminal cases. Dale.
I don't understand how you decide, even with just two pairs, which pair is lying. So yeah, the second pair could be saying you were with me when that isn't true. How does that get resolved?
Yeah, I think it was another time that we actually had this debate, and I went back to the sources in the Torah. You know, there is an assumption that testifying and becoming witnesses that are, you know, going through the hazama process, that hezimu otam, that if I'm willing to, as one of two witnesses, come and be the pair that impeaches the first set of witnesses, that I take so seriously this Torah mitzvah. And the rabbis are setting it up that this Torah mitzvah can be fulfilled in a pure and a holy way. And that is the assumption in the Gemara. That we don't understand how we totally put our faith in that second pair of witnesses. That is an open question. That is an open question. And add to that, so the discussions are unfolding here, and it seems to cast some doubt sometimes on whether or not a pair of witnesses who are going to mazimim, it casts some doubt as to whether or not the pair of witnesses to come and say these are conspiring witnesses actually can fulfill that job. Because sometimes they do, you know, as in our Mishnah, they will want to testify, well, Reuben obviously was not the killer because I know Reuben was, you know, with us at such and such restaurant, right? Well, that does not effectuate Eidim Zomi, Hazama. So it again, like, gets narrowed. However, you're right. There's still an open question as to how a second pair of witnesses is stam believed, is plainly believed when they come and they're sworn in and they take an oath and they testify that such and such people were with us when they, you know, sounds like plainly could be making that up. But the Torah says this is a serious matter. This is part of the system we have as Beit Din, as courts. And so therefore we swear them in and we trust that the system will play itself out as to discover the, let's say, the truth and the efficacy of that aspect of the judicial system. Again, this also, just for us, who look at this as trying to play out the discussions in order to figure out whether or not we could really have a system that really gets to the core of true justice at a time when courts would be reinstated. Because remember, when it came to having murderers on the streets of Israel, it got so profound. We said this in one of the earlier classes, that they basically said the Beit Din's closed. Our system of justice is not going to be the one to adjudicate matters. You kill, let the state kill you. In other words, Dina de Malchuta Dina, the empire is going to have to deal with these treacherous people. We're not keeping the Beit Din open because we're not convinced. And I think you could say it to this level, which gets to the heart of your question, Dale. We're not convinced that we have a Beit Din that gets all the way to adjudicating matters in a totally fair and impartial way, right? Already we legislate out the death penalty. We're not in that passage yet, but we're going to see later that they even get back to that in our Gemara, not just in Sanhedrin, the tractate before this one. So the long way around in terms of that answer is that we are thinking about whether or not this system of justice sounds like a good system of justice at all levels here in Masechet Sanhedrin, in Masechet Makkot. And we're saying to ourselves, is this right or is this not? And the committee meetings and the further commentaries on how to run our Beit Din are as important as what's on the page of Gemara, because it's a living text and it's a living textbook that you have to argue about and figure out how to apply, right? So that's the best I can do.
If I can make two comments, I would assume that if the third set of witnesses were Hillel and Shammai, great sages, they're really accusing the second set of being conspiring, or at least of lying in some way or another. It does make sense to me that, assuming that, it's the great sages are the second set, let's say, that there should be a limit to how many people are going to get killed over this case.
Right. By the way, just to give you a sense of one person who came up with a potential way to understand the Mishnah in a way that makes some sense, or, like, all right, let's figure out, like, what's the case here, that game? Like, what's the case? One commentary says that the two witnesses who were willing to impeach everyone, up to 100 pairs, right? They were obviously the ones who threw the party where everyone was. And everyone at the party was conspiring against the guy on the stand. But they know full well, because they had every one of those people as guests in their home, or they were with them in a big banquet. And so they're willing to stand there and say, no. All of you are conspiring against this guy. And as an example, the court's going to kill the first pair, because you can't kill 100 people. We can't kill 200 people. But we are going to say that the first two who got up deserve the death penalty that you tried to lay on Reuben. Okay, so that's like the creative approach to saying what was the potential case, where it does make some sense that you're going to kill that first set, but you couldn't kill the other 198 people. Take it or leave it as making, good sense and being a good case. But that's what comes into focus. By the way,
but also,
Barry.
No, I just say, I'll just flip it over and say it also makes it easier for, numbers 2 through 99 to come forward if they know that they're not going to be in jeopardy.
Right.
So if they're piling, if they can pile on to this, to this lie with impunity, that's not great public policy either.
Right on. All right, so interesting times in the courts. Here we go. We're going to get into the Gemara now and see where the Gemara takes us. This is now, if you've got the Schottenstein, the art scroll on 5A2, the Gemara starts, and here it's on the screen. Menahane mili. And so we have the halacha that the witnesses are eidim zomamim, they're conspiring witnesses, only if the second set testifies that the first set was with them elsewhere. Not if they directly contradict the testimony, the facts of the case. It's about those two witnesses and where they were, and that they were with us, and that therefore they couldn't be the ones to testify about the case. So how do we know that that's the threshold of proof? Amar Rav Ada. Rav Ada says the following. The Amar Kra, he wants to bring a biblical proof. That's what Kra means, right? Like the word Mikra is the Tanakh. Kra is a verse. It's another word for pasuk. It's another word for verse. Vehine ed sheker ha'ed sheker ana. The verse says in Deuteronomy, and the witness is a false witness. It's not the testimony, edu. It's the aid. It's the witness who is sheker, who is the false witness that testifies falsely. So the first part of the pasuk is that the witness is the liar. The witness is the schemer. Ad shetishaker gufa shel edu. And then, and only then, after you impeach the aid, can you get to the reality of the body of the testimony, the gufa shel edut. So that can sound like a lot of aid and hey aid and edut, but it's all right there, because in the path of the verse, I have to first say and impeach the false witness, who then gives false testimony. Devei Rabbi Yishmael Tana, and in the school of Rabbi Yishmael, it's taught from a different source. This happens in terms of a structure of the Gemara. When I have a question, minhane mili, and I get an Amar Rav Ada, de Amar Kra, that's Aramaic, so I know I'm in the Aramaic layers of the Gemara, which is the Amoraim. That's why it's, instead of bait, it's Devei Rabbi Yishmael Tana with an aleph. So here we have Aramaic, an argument, machloket, about the source of why we say first that it's a false witness himself and not about the testimony. Here's a different verse. La'anot bo Sarah. If an unrighteous witness rises up against any man, what? La'anot bo Sarah, to bear perverted witness against him. So if I look at Deuteronomy 19:16, and I'm going to just read it out loud here for pulling up the verse. It says, Ki yakum eid chamas be'ish. If a false witness rises up against any man to testify against him, that which is wrong. So again, I have a verse not fully quoted in the Gemara. They expected that we knew the beginning of the verse. Only the end of the verse was quoted in most manuscripts. There is a manuscript that has the full verse, by the way. And I'm going to show you the full verse here. Hold on. Getting the screen ready. Just getting this share ready. I'm sorry. Second screen. You got it? You see now the verse, Deuteronomy 19? Richard, can you see that? Thumbs up? Yeah, okay. So, ki yakum eid chamas be'ish. If a man appears against another to testify maliciously, la'anot bo Sarah. Now, this verb la'anot is understood not as to answer, but as actually to testify. And you see that it says in the Rashi, this witness, that two other witnesses say, but were you not with us on that day, et cetera, et cetera. Rashi brings the commentary of Eidim Zomamin on this verse. So here seems like we have a verse from Torah that also is about this hazama without the exact vocabulary of the other spot in Torah that had the falsity of edut and aid. Ki yakum, though aid is here, Hamas, instead of that word about like the malicious, the source of the whole thing is Hamas here, that there's like real violence, as opposed to just a sense of either revenge or kind of that it's a real plotting. Remember, the other vocabulary that we had in Torah was the plotting witness. Here, it's the witness that does violence. So that's a powerful notion of which verse, the kind of argument about which verse really applies. Rabbi Yishmael says it's this one where he's going to do violence to his neighbor, and the other one comes from the same area of Torah that says the witness is a false witness, age sheker, and it makes sense with the both of them, because sometimes what a machloket does in terms of the Gemara is it gives you the sense all around of what's really going on. I have the verse that says from Rav Ada that it's a false witness, and he gives false testimony. And I also have from Devei Rabbi Yishmael the verse that says he's really doing violence against his brother, and it's to stand up and say this lie, this bold-faced lie. And so given both of them, I get a sense of how serious that is, and that it's really about the impeaching the witness and decrying such behavior than it is about having to really answer for the details of the case. You don't have to know about the case. In the end, what does it mean? Not only, like Richard said, could you mistake the identity and get into the trees, but the forest is that you cannot have people conspiring to make up stories when, in fact, I know they were with me. And we need you to stand up and say so. So that's where it rolls first in the Gemara. Okay, now, next little section in the Talmud. Amarava, Rav is going to now teach Ba'u Shnayim va'amru b'mizrach bira harag ploni et anefesh. Now we're going to get into a specific little case here. Rav says two witnesses come and say that so-and-so, right? Shimon now, let's say Shimon now, killed Reuben. So now Shimon's the killer in our example. And he kills Reuben. And he killed him where? Mizrach Bira. He kills him to the east of a building. Or what's the word Bira? In the Schottenstein, it translates it as the east wing of a palace. Or Bira is like a capital. So what? Let's say it's a serious building. It's also the word in general for a building that has an east and a west. Some houses were one room. So here it's a building that has an east and a west. You're standing in the middle or you're standing on the other side. Uvau shnayim. So the testimony was that Shimon kills Reuben in the east part of a big building that has an east and a west. Uvau shnayim, and two witnesses come, a pair of witnesses come, v'amru, and they say, v'halo b'ma'arav bira imanu hayitim. You were with us in the west part of the building, in the west part of the palace. Chazainan? Ikidekayimi b'ma'arav bira mi chaza chazu l'mizrach bira ein elu zomami. V'im love harei elu zomami. So we go look. Chazainan. Now that's an interesting little verb by way of Gemara language and hermeneutics. We'll get back to that in a second as a technical note. If when people stand in the western part of the building, they could actually see through to the eastern part of the building, we say that these first witnesses are not conspiring witnesses because there's a line of sight. V'im love hare elu zomami. And if we go and look and we don't see that there's a clear line of vision to the other side of the building, we say that they are conspiring witnesses. Because what? They were with the second set in the west. But if there was a clear line of vision from west to east, we say they're not zomimim. We say that their testimony holds. But if there was not a clear line of vision from west to east, we say that they are conspiring witnesses. Gemara says, Pshita, that's very obvious. If you could see from over there, the west to the east, you know that they're not zomimim. Why is the Mishnah bringing us this case? Or why is Rava, bringing us this case, not the Mishnah. Why is Rava bringing us this case? What might you have thought about in this case that you would have to take into consideration about these two witnesses that testify as to this death, as to this murder in the east? It says, Mahu the Tema. So you could have been one to say that with these two witnesses in such a case where you're in a big bira and there's a west and there's an east and the testimony came that there was a murder in the east, lechush lenahora bari, you might have said that if these people have particularly good eyesight and were able to see that far, despite the typical person not being able to see that far, if you know that these are like X-ray vision guys and could see through the walls, if you know that they have superpower vision, you might have thought that I say they're not Eidim Zomimim because they have superpower vision. Kamash Malan, that's what Rava is coming to teach us, that we don't really take into consideration extra superpower vision. So what's fascinating about this little piece of the Gemara with this case that's brought forward is I have a case now where I'm considering the physical structure of the architecture that people are standing in. So who actually goes and makes the determination as to whether or not someone could see clearly from the west to the east or the east to the west? Right? What officer of the court actually determines that? Who gets the final rule? Is it the judges? Is it a architectural expert? Is there a named sage who becomes the expert in telling you, no, this building qualifies as one where there's a clear line of sight from west to east? That's a question that's left open that I couldn't find an answer for when I started learning the daf this time around. I can't really tell you what that level of court officership looks like. I can tell you this. The one summer I interned at a law firm. First of all, I don't know why they did this to me. I was a high schooler, senior in high school. It was after senior year, and I was the one to actually go into the Italian restaurant in New Jersey and deliver a subpoena by hand to the builder who was facing a trial. Now, at that time, there was no such thing as The Sopranos, but I must tell you, there was still a lot of lore around Italian restaurants on Route 10 in Parsippany with the builders in Morris County who we couldn't find and who didn't accept a subpoena until the 5'11" Pittel from the high school, the intern from the summer, interrupts him. You know, he's got his napkin on his shirt like this, and the gravy, don't call it sauce, is falling off the meal. And I'm like, are you Bruno? You know, here's the subpoena, Mr. Bruno. So anyway, what was the problem? The problem was that he was supposed to build an enclosed structure that had windows, And this structure was supposed to see to the right and the left of the backyard when the parents stood in the kitchen, so that you could see all the different kind of playground and swing set and swimming pool and everything. And then ultimately, because of the way the structures were built, there was or there wasn't the clear line of sight, right? So the prosecution sends people to take pictures, and they create a whole set of pictures for the courtroom, and the defense sends a photographer, and trust me, the prosecution's photographs look nothing like the defense photographs, nothing at all. This one, you couldn't see a thing, the prosecution. The defense, you could see it, you could see it all, you could see everywhere. Ultimately, what happens in Morris County, at least, where the suit was, I remember the sheriff's office had someone who was kind of like the, between the sheriff's evidence person and the land surveying group from the county, who actually was sent in to make what they thought were the most impartial drawings and sets of photographs at the time, no digital at that time to bring and show on a screen. But this is a fascinating question to me as to really how they establish whether there's a clear line of sight or not. And what's really fascinating to me is that you might be concerned that, these guys have superpower vision. You could say like, no, these guys, they could really see. If they were willing to testify, they have superpower vision. They have really clear vision. No, but we don't do that because you don't want to have such exceptional kind of, realities come into play. You want to take like the average person here into play. You want to take the average person into account. Could a normal person see across the way? Let's agree on that. Let's try to agree on that. Now, how, again, you get to that standard, I couldn't find a sage who was the court-appointed land surveyor or the guy who was the palace architect who was brought in as the expert. None of the commentaries that I read by the early Rishonim or anything talked about the fuzziness and the grayness of this issue either. But that to me is a question that stands on this part of the Gemara. How do you see it? How do you see this case? What surprises you here, or what kind of thoughts have you had as I've gone through this Rava case here of east to west?
I'm surprised that where they were standing at the time they made the eyewitness accounting wasn't established in the original trial. The fact that it appears that this is novel information, that they were standing in the West Wing rather than the East Wing, I would have thought that would have been something that the defense attorney or their equivalent would have uncovered on cross-examination of the witnesses. So it seems like a very odd, it seems like a lot of artifice in this example. Mm-hmm. It may have pedagogical value for bringing out a point, but I think it's moving it away from what I would have thought would have been established in the original case, and therefore seems far-fetched. And it gets to the first comment of, well, of course that's the case, meaning, of course, if they couldn't see from there, we don't need a whole new thing. We don't need a new principle here to establish that fact, is what I sort of resonated with. So that's my reaction.
Yeah, I think in terms of the pedagogical value as well, like, again, if the Gemara is presenting all of the possible outcomes of cases that include all the conceptual frameworks and all of the functional frameworks that we have at our disposal to make sure 100% that our testimony is kosher, right? Then this is instructive by way of those defense lawyers who need to read, what happens, what did they miss? What simple questions did they miss that they could ask the next time? So if it's a textbook and there's any pedagogical value in these cases for that kind of approach, and by the way, there are some scholars who do think both Mishnah and Gemara is somewhat like a law book that works like a textbook and does beg people to sharpen and hone their skills, then that matters a lot. On cross-examination itself, Barry, you bring up a good point. What's the nature of cross-examination? Maybe establishing where someone is actually witnessing from is as important as what they witnessed and how could they not have gotten to that before. A good point. Definitely a good point. Yeah, Dale. You're on mute if you thought you were unmuted.
Sorry. Do we know that there were actually prosecutors and defense lawyers? My image is you have, if this is a capital case, 70 lawyers sitting there, and somebody asks a question and they don't have an answer, so they send out someone, maybe one of the junior judges or students studying to be a judge, to go look. Right.
The system is not exactly the prosecution and defense, but they do have sometimes people who take the sides. So yeah, that's just on a technical note, you're right. There's no state prosecutor. Definitely. All right. Here's a different one, a different case that comes to light. Again, whether it was like Dale just said, someone standing up and asking the question, or it was a little bit more like we're trying to make sure that there are those who are the categor and senegor. That's the structure in which there were some kind of representatives is called categor and senegor, and the prosecution and the defense. And sometimes people would have that help. At least we theoretically think about people having that help to either kind of prove their points and bring a defense forward. But they are not the ones on the stand. The witnesses themselves are, and that's why we have two for corroboration. Okay, the next case. Rob is going to bring a next case. So Rava has this next case, and he says, Amar Rava, Ba'u shnayim va'amru. Two witnesses come and say, Basura b'tzafra b'chad b'shabta harag ploni et hanefesh. So in Surah, on Sunday morning, Safra is morning, Chad b'Shabta is Sunday, the first day of the week. Ploni killed the person. Uvav shnayim va'amru. Two other witnesses come and say, Befanya, b'chad b'shabta, imanu hayitem b'nehar de'ah. Wait a minute. In the evening on Sunday, you were already with us in Nehar De'ah. So the first two witnesses came and said, so-and-so killed a person in Surah, Sunday morning. The second set of witnesses come and say, but you were with us in the evening in Nehar De'ah. Now, what's the measure? Chazenon. We go and see. Im mitzafra lefanya matze azil misura lenarda lo havu zoimamin ve'im lov havu zoimamin. Here's the measure. If one's able to travel from Surah to Nehar De'ah from the morning until the evening, we say they are not conspiring witnesses. That could have been possible. They could have been in Surah in the morning on Sunday and made it to Nehardea. So if that's possible on a regular basis, given all things being equal, if a person could travel from one spot to the other, we say they are not conspiring witnesses. But if it's impossible to travel from one place to another, they are conspiring witnesses. And the Gemara now says the same kind of response. Pshita, I knew that. What are you trying to really say here? They say, well, what we don't want is any kind of weighing in with an exceptional case. How is that in this case? Lechush legam laparcha kamash melan. We don't say that we're concerned about the possibility that these witnesses came flying in on a camel. There's one thing you'll remember tonight. We're back to animal friends. And in this case, they are flying camels. We don't worry about flying camels, meaning that they hired one that runs so quickly that it enables them to travel the distance faster than a typical person. Rava teaches that that's why Rava is bringing the case. In other words, or the Gemara teaches, that's why Rava is bringing us this case, because we're not going to allow any thought that some very, very quick camel could have taken them the distance. Meaning what? If I say that a flying camel can get them to Nehardea, then what happens?
Well,
you got it, Richard?
Yeah, well, if they could have gotten there by this exceptional means, then you could say that they're not necessarily conspiring witnesses. That makes it harder to make them innocent of being conspiring witnesses than what's being stated here, which is no, preclude that. If it's likely, much more likely, that they couldn't possibly get there, then they treat them as conspiring witnesses with the full penalties.
Okay. Someone want to restate that? Listen to the way the Art Scroll says it. You might have said that even if the time was too short, we'd be concerned for the possibility of an unusually swift camel that can make the trip in so short a time. So he says, we're not going to consider that possibility. We're not going to consider that possibility. So what we want to rule out is the possibility that they have one of these. Look at my screen. The picture is not great. We want to rule out the possibility that they hired one of these flying camels. Now, Gamla Parcha there are several breeds of camel used for different purposes. Most camels are employed as beasts of burden and they walk slowly. Racing camels are capable of running fast like a galloping horse for an extended period of time. Apparently, the term for flying camel refers to a camel of this sort. So in the ancient world, I've got camels that are beasts of burden. They bring spices, they go on caravan walks, they are my transportation through the hills, they carry my equipment, they carry my my cooking dome, they have it all. Great, right? But there are certain breeds that move a lot faster. Yes, Richard.
I think what this is saying, we go by beyond reasonable doubt. You make a conviction for something like this, you're talking about death things, conceivably. for conspiring witnesses, and we say it has to be beyond reasonable doubt. And to me, what they're saying is speculating that they might have used a flying camel is beyond reasonable doubt. Now, it doesn't say what happens if they actually find that the person that rented them the camel comes in and says, "Oh yeah, I rented them the camel. That's how they got here." Then it becomes reasonable doubt, right? But you can't go. That's not reasonable. Like kind of drawing a line on what is reasonable doubt.
Interesting part, right? I think yes, you're onto it. What we say is this, right? If they say in the morning that Reuben kills Shimon, and a reasonable person could make it to Nahardea by the evening, right? And then we say that their testimony is trustworthy because they made it, right? But if it's not possible to travel that distance in that period of time, they are Eidim Zomami. If I say that from Surah to Nahardea, it's not possible, except if you have a flying camel. Not everybody could be on a flying camel. And I don't want to mix this in to my standard measure of whether or not I consider these witnesses to be trustworthy witnesses or conspiring witnesses. So I don't want you to tell me about the Accelerator train. I don't want you to tell me about some supersonic jet. I need a standard of measuring. Again, what I'm interested in here is a question like, who ultimately makes the standard when I don't have a highway system? Which animal are we talking about? You know, a horse, a donkey, walking? I don't have Google Maps or a GPS that has the little walking guy. And by the way, how do they make the decision about how many minutes that really works? Is that based on the algorithm of it records how many minutes it took you to get from place A to place B and then gives me a unique set of minutes? Or is that like general, like human beings only walk this many miles per hour, but they don't really take into account walk signs and not walk signs, but maybe in New York, the algorithm changes. I don't know. Like, I don't really know what the exact standard is. All I know is that we don't really accept that a flying camel can be put into the mix. Now, what's interesting in that scenario is that I do have a little bit of a problem. The Tosafot point out a problem with this, like excluding a flying camel. Because in another place, I accept that a flying camel got a couple of witnesses over to where I was at night. And I say, no, it was obviously kosher. These witnesses definitely could have witnessed a get in the morning over there in Jerusalem and gotten to Lod or wherever they were going by the nighttime, because there's such a thing as a flying camel. They could have taken the express. So what happens is that there's a get, and people want to know, like, with these guys being over here in this second city, how is it we say that, in fact, they were able to witness it in the morning? Comes along question the Gemara asks, so how do we say that it's kosher? A gamla parcha, a flying camel, took them to second city. They were obviously in city number one in the morning because they had such a fast ride. They got to us. Totally possible. Totally possible. Now, if I say that about Eidim Zomamin, what I say about them all the time is that they're not zomamim. Right? If I let the standard of a flying camel, of a really fast camel be my standard, I have less of a chance to really create hazama. The Gemara seems to have an interest in the system actually making sure that sometimes I do have hazama, sometimes I don't have hazama, and it has to be based on normal travel times, again, whatever those are. So the Tosafot say in the situation with the get that we want flying camels in the picture because we want to release this woman with her get. Over here, we don't want it because we need to have a consistent application of law and not account for some extra quick travel means when we're adjudicating the matter of one place versus another, morning and evening testimony about such a case as a murder. So that's the answer. Whether or not it's satisfying entirely, I just want to tell you that flying camels as such, the fast camels, having done a little research this week about flying camels, there's someone who says, why is it that they use the term flying camels? Is it only about speed? Interesting, when camels are in a caravan and they're walking, and you're watching them across this arid landscape, sometimes the heat and the heads of the people can make it seem like these camels are kind of walking a little bit on air and they're up there. And then there's the other person who says, no, we call them flying camels because maybe what we're saying is that to get back to a Shabbos issue, since we opened with a Shabbos issue, when it's Shabbos and you have a little bit of distance to still go, and you want to get to that Shabbos community, and you're worried that there's only so much distance between the ground and the area of Shabbat that you're not really allowed to walk past. Well, if they were flying, and they happen to be flying above the kind of area of Shabbos, as we see in one of the Masechtas, that there's a certain kind of height of the space I'm not allowed. If I'm above it, right, then I don't have to worry, in a certain sense, that the camels are like flying above that Shabbos wire, and maybe they could keep going if in fact that they were flying camels. They happen to be pulling me along. Okay, they're pulling me along, but they're the ones flying. Finally, I'll tell you that racing camels in arid places, you thought maybe if you ever visited Australia and you went to some of the festivals of the natives, that camels were indigenous and they were there all the time, and they had camel races, and they would make them trot, and they would even have these fun races. It's only later in history that camels were introduced to the scene over there. And yes, they're kind of good animals for the arid areas of Australia, and they started racing them as a little bit of sporting fun, but it's really not that part of the world that we say that these beasts of burden or flying camels are really from. We know that they were brought later to the continent. Back to the Middle East, there is work since 2004 and 6 and 8 as to how to deal with camel populations and whether or not camel farms are a good idea, and that they would help the desert and arid lands become more fertile in their way as desert, or whether or not letting them wander naturally would be the way to go forward. And there's a report out there from a United Nations agency about, just camel management in the Middle East, which I found very interesting over the course of reading this week. To check out if you're interested, you could put in UN and camel farming and just take a look. Take a look. I'm not suggesting that you can farm a flying camel anywhere. Don't get them anywhere near New York either. Not in our airspace. Yeah, Barry.
I'd just say I remember watching Lawrence of Arabia, and in war, those camels were moving pretty fast in some of those scenes. So I don't know exactly where they got them from, but those were pretty fleet-footed camels, as if my memory serves me right.
Yeah, I think that especially for the movies, they got camels that moved. I don't know if those were the ones that generally helped out armies, what the history is of the camel and military. That'd be an interesting read. I did not look towards the military aspect of camels.
We have, we can pit the Hannibal's elephants against the flying camels. It'd be interesting to see who wins that war.
Right on. Right on. All right, folks. That takes us to 9 o'clock.